Welcome to Sports Management Podcast, where you will hear interesting sports management professionals share their stories, experiences, and passion for the sports management industry. I am your host, Marcus Philipson. Welcome to episode 163 of Sports Management Podcast. Today's guest is Robbie Douek, CEO of Blast. Blast is a Copenhagen-based E-sports entertainment company delivering events across the world. We spoke about Blast's partnership with Alpine F1, how Robbie has been working in sectors where he can make a difference, working for Google and Disney, the development of esports, difference and learnings from traditional sports, esports versus competitive gaming, why 2024 is the biggest year for esports in UK history, and much more. Robbie Douek, welcome to Sports Management Podcast.
Absolute pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
It's my great pleasure to have you on the show. You are the Chief Executive Officer of Blast, a Copenhagen-based esports and entertainment company. So can you tell us a little bit about what is Blast and your role?
Yeah, so Robbie Douek, CEO of Blast, global entertainment business specializing in esports and gaming. We're based in Copenhagen, Denmark. And we have about 130, 140 staff dotted around the world, but mostly in Europe. And essentially our role is to create incredible spectacle within the esports space, great shows around the world, incredible tournaments for the biggest gaming publishers on the planet, and then entertain millions of consumers around the world. That's our target. And my role of chief exec is to try and make sure everything's in line, in gear, keep our board of directors happy, investors, and most importantly, the team.
Interesting. So you're bringing events across the world with esports. So how has this market developed, you would say, over a couple of years? Like in my opinion, maybe during COVID, it got some type of boost also when people were from their houses, maybe not the events in the arenas, but, esports as a whole.
Yeah, so, the way that we think about esports is we work with the biggest global publishers in the ecosystem. So you've got your Epic Games, your Ubisofts, your Valves, your Riot Games of this world who have the biggest gaming titles out there. And we bring their games to life through leagues, tournaments, events that are hosted around the world. So in most of those cases, we have exclusive relationships with those partners, with those publishers to stream the content, to create the content, to create the output, and to host the events around the world. And as you quite rightly say, Marcus, that during the pandemic, basically esports didn't really skip a beat. Everything else was offline, but esports was very much online. Why? Because we were fortunate to be able to stream from essentially players playing from their homes, right? And that wasn't something that you could do if you were a footballer or a tennis player. And so, we have a very unique and incredible technology set up at Blast, which enables us to stream either from our studio or completely remotely around the world. So, we could be playing a game together and then we could stream that content across all of our digital platforms so that millions of eyeballs can view it. No one else during the pandemic was able to kind of create that environment. And so that was very helpful for us to be able to create a lot of value within the viewership base, and I think that has then manifested itself going forwards across the world.
So I know that you are hosting events with the most popular games like Counter-Strike and Dota and so forth, but are you doing also, like, for example, the more traditional sports but in esport formats, like we're talking FIFA or something like that?
Yeah, it tends to be that the highest viewership comes from the games like Fortnite and Rocket League and as you say, Dota and CS, but we've also done a lot of work with FIFA, which is now EAFC, done a bunch of work on those titles. We ran the entire FIFA Premier League back in 22-23. We've done a bunch of work in other sporting titles. We've just launched into tennis, actually. There's something that we've built in partnership with Amex and Wimbledon, specifically around the Wimbledon Championships, which is very cool. We'll see more of that. But to be clear, I think you'll find that the viewership of some of those traditional titles is less important than the non-ones. But again, I think these sporting titles are going to change. I think that will evolve over the period of the next 2 years. And I think we'll see that more and more traditional sports are trying to connect with those audiences, connect with that younger generation, And that's one of the reasons why, Wimbledon's launched into a tennis game, which I think is phenomenal.
So talking about the gaming industry, I read that it's worth over $200 billion, and it's a number that just getting bigger and bigger over the years. So after we talked about that there was a boom during COVID, after the pandemic. So how do you see the development in the industry in general going forward now on?
Look, when you're the chief exec of any business, you want to see hockey stick growth, right, in the industry you're working within. So I'd obviously say that, yes, the industry is moving in the right direction. I think there are two components to that. There is, yes, we saw a growth during the pandemic, which was very helpful for viewership, but monetization wasn't necessarily there, right? Because the global advertiser base had sort of retrenched back in, etc. We're now seeing that change, and I think monetization is really going to kick on over the period of the next 4 or 5 years. In fact, that $200 billion business that is global gaming, I expect will be worth $300 billion by 2030. So in the matter of the next 5 years, adding another $100 billion on. And I think esports and gaming will benefit, or esports will benefit majorly from that. So we think we're in the right place at the right time to be able to really churn up our monetization.
Are there any learnings that esports can take from traditional sports and vice versa?
Look, I think there are massive similarities between traditional sports and esports. The entire business model of esports is really built around the sports model, right? If you think about our revenue streams, they are traditional sponsorship, media rights. So we're selling our rights all around the world to different people who want to take them. Ticketing, merchandise revenue, in-game transactions. In-game transactions is probably slightly different to traditional sport, right? But ultimately, the model is built in the same way. And then if you think about the club system that sits within traditional sports, if you're a football club, rugby club, or a traditional player within a single sport, the same thing occurs for esports. You've got these global clubs that are now situated across the world who are making revenue streams which are very similar to the ones that they would make if you were Man City or Man United, for example.
That's interesting. You are based in UK. So how do you see the gaming industry if we isolate it to the UK? I know it continues to prove itself as an epicenter of gaming and esports.
Well, it's based here in the UK, so you can hear the British accent. Yeah, no, I think that the great thing is that the UK is a globally leading population. It has a good size, obviously, in terms of its overall population. But I think we've seen in the past 6 months a turn in a very positive trend towards esports and gaming. And I think we'll see that continue into 25, 26. The noise that's coming out of this current government, the new government that we have, it is very positive towards gaming and esports. Not to say that the last one wasn't, but I think that this is a far more developed area that I think people want to focus on. In the last 3 months, and just in the UK alone, we've hosted a multitude of different events from within the UK. So, we've brought 3 flagship events to the UK, one in Manchester and 2 in London. In Manchester, we hosted the Rainbow Six Major, and in London, we hosted a Counter-Strike event at the Wembley Arena. And then on the back of that, we hosted a Rocket League event as well at the Copper Box, which is all phenomenal venues with thousands of people buying tickets. I think we actually created an economic impact for the UK of about £28 million during that period of time. We sold 45,000 tickets. And so I think that the UK, whilst it has a 8% share of the global esports market, is now going to kick on going further. The work that's done by the British Esports Federation, the work that's done by many of the clubs in the UK. And then I think we are watching with bated breath to see what the IOC does within the esports component, right? There's been a couple of announcements in the past couple of weeks that are going to shine a light on esports overall at the Olympic level. And I think that's going to fundamentally make a difference to young, aspiring athletes from the UK and beyond. And let's be clear, in my mind, in our eyes, these are athletes, right? These are global sports people who are performing at the best of their ability, the highest possible level of their ability at the global level. And you have to really put in the hours to get there.
Definitely. And it's 2 great points you bring up, and I want to take them one by one. So if we start with getting like Olympic recognition, how do you see that? Because esports is a term that involves different of the games. So are you seeing a specific game like Dota or CS to be in the Olympics, or is it the larger, like the esports umbrella will be under the Olympic movement, or what is your vision for esports and Olympics?
Look, I'm not in charge of what the Olympic or the IFC decides on what the output looks like, but I would expect that you will see a core amount of esports that will feature within that esports output within the Olympics. Whether they be virtual or normal games or traditional games, we don't know yet. I think there's announcements to follow in that space. However, I'd say some of these games do lend themselves quite nicely to an Olympic title. You mentioned Dota. I think Rocket League could also be interesting, but there are other titles where it is very strategic, right? But also you've then got like the whole world of sim racing, and then the whole sort of virtual world of people on bikes, etc. So I think there are titles that lend themselves very well to the Olympic movement, which have a combination of strategy, but also physical adaptability and strength and mental strength. And I think that's really going to play a part in the output the IOC does in and around the Olympics going forward. So very excited about that development indeed.
Of course, the Olympics is obviously such a window for the world to be shown also for you as to promote esports.
Look, I think we're a few days, weeks away from the content going live in Paris, and the world will be watching these phenomenal athletes perform at the best of their ability. The same thing will happen with esports. I mean, what you should recognize when you're watching any esports is that there are millions of eyeballs watching that content at any point in time live, right? So one of the things that we look at is how many live concurrent viewers are watching at that moment in time. And to be quite clear, often that rivals and beats traditional sports. So you'll see more people watching a Dota 2 game than watching potentially a Premier League match, right? And that's just because that is the direction of travel for the consumers today.
So the second part I wanted to touch on there was you said these are athletes that they are playing the esports, and that's, I guess, people from more traditional sports. Maybe there is a criticism are you an athlete if you're playing on the computer, so to speak. I also had the same discussion when I was talking about chess, a guy from the Chess Federation, and he also said it is a sport, it's physical, it's mental. Where do you stand on esports as being a sport, and is it important to be categorized as a sport?
Look, I think there's been quite a lot of debate over the period of the last 6-7 years about where esports sits within government positioning, right? i.e., are we part of the Ministry of Sport, the Ministry of Culture, depending on the country, right? But I think most of the governments around the world are now really seeing esports as a sport and really lining up with that. And I from our perspective, we do fundamentally feel like this is a sport. I mean, you are physically working incredibly hard to be at the best of your ability. And as you quite rightly identify, most of the clubs and professional players around the world have got psychologists, nutritionists, coaches, physical fitness experts all around them to try and get them to the best of their ability. And I think that is very much on a par with what traditional sports is all about. And then, if you just watch esports unfold and you watch the spectacle, the moment when a team or a player wins is on a par to when, someone wins. I was watching Wimbledon last week. Alcaraz wins, the Wimbledon Grand Slam over here in the UK. And that pure elation and joy is very similar. And so the adrenaline is there. And I feel that is something that we need to convey as an industry to the wider world, because often people forget that. They see gaming and esports as something where, kids are locked away in their room playing, but it's not all about that. These athletes are working incredibly hard to be at the best of their ability.
Yes, of course. And I think that many of the critics, they don't have that type of insight. You don't know enough, and then you make an assumption. But as you said, of course, you need to be in a good shape. It's hand-eye coordination. It's managing your stress. And then, of course, competing on the highest level. So I definitely see the arguments for being a sport. I've heard you in other interviews referring to esports as competitive gaming. And I've had this discussion before on this podcast. So are the terms equal, or do they mean different things, or is there one that is preferred or not?
Look, I think we operate within a world which is competitive gaming. I think it is the notion of five versus five on a server, right? Playing against each other is competitive. And I think that that is a clear definition of what esports is all about. However, I've also said in the past, and I'll say it again, I think the reality is that if you are five friends at home and playing on Fortnite together on your Switch, I also think that's competitive because ultimately it's five friends competing against each other. And by the way, I think that that is a positive, right? So I think competitive gaming in the right environment, built with the right protections around it, is a positive piece, and I believe in that fundamentally.
Going back to Blast, you have some very interesting partnerships. For example, the Alpine F1. So can you talk a little bit about the partnerships that you have?
Yeah, we work with multitude of different partners across the globe from different sectors, but this particular one was very cool. We worked with Renault Alpine during the Paris major. We hosted a major in France. It was the first time that Paris had ever hosted an event of this size in the esports. I think we did 42,000 tickets over a weekend, and millions of eyeballs. And for Alpine, it was absolutely a symbiotic relationship. The ability for them to tap into our audiences, but then for us to tap into their audiences, really created this sort of cross collaboration between the two parties. And the actual activations were really cool. So we had an Alpine car within the venue itself, i.e., within the arena, within the bowl. It was great. All the fans absolutely loved that. And then we had this skinned up Alpine car. So in the venue, we had the Formula One car, and on the outside of the venue, we had this Alpine car that was skinned up by a very well-known CSGO skin artist. So skins are the things that you trade on the platform within the game. And then in contraparty to that, we also featured on the Alpine Formula One car during the Monaco Grand Prix. And actually, it was a great Grand Prix because I think Ocon finished third. So actually, we had a lot of viewership from that. And you can understand why, right? You know why Alpine wants to be part of esports, and why we want to associate ourselves with a brand like Alpine. Why? Because you've got two up and coming esports is up and coming, and you've got Formula One, which is already at a level as well. But the cross collaboration creates real interest between those two audience bases. So a very cool integration.
Definitely. And the Formula One fan base also has been younger in age after the Netflix documentary, and the more younger people that are interested. And of course, they have also the simulations and different part that could, direct into esports a little bit. And so I think that there could be definitely like similar fan bases between these sports for sure.
Yeah, and like 10 years ago, 7 years ago, before Drive to Survive came out, you probably wouldn't have said that, right? But now, Gasly, Ocon, alongside all of the others, right? Piastri and Norris and Verstappen are household names, right? And are household names to younger generations. But then they've also identified the esports as a way for them to connect their brand with that wider audience. And if you think about brands like Ferrari, they do really well from the brand itself. People aspiring to wear clothes associated with Ferrari, etc., and to be part of that brand. And I think Alpine, as an up and coming brand, is probably in a similar boat.
Some other partnerships, I think, or you work together with Unilever and Magnum Ice Cream. Is that correct?
Yeah, we've worked with fast-moving consumer goods brands across the board. So Unilever is one, which we've done a bunch of work with, both across Magnum ice cream, but also their snacking brands like Pot Noodle, and various other fast-moving consumer goods companies across the globe. You can understand why they want to work with us. Their client base is very well targeted, but also it's important to note that when we run these campaigns, like we're doing really cool immersive integrations within the experience itself. And I think that it lends itself to really working well with the audience. On top of that, we work with multiple movie studios. So we run quite a lot of work with, Universal, various others, Warner, etc., across movie title releases. The automotive sector is strong in esports too. And then sort of traditional brands really coming into the space. We just had Revolut, for example, being a partner with ours on the Counter-Strike event in the UK as a presenting partner. So even the finance industry is tapped into esports. And I think this is my point from earlier on. I think as the global market gets stronger and this demographic, which is hard to reach, becomes more accessible. What do I mean by that? I mean that when the data is available to access these users in a more material way, then I think you'll see that a lot of investment will come into esports as a component of that.
If we look at the gender equity now with the Paris is the first 50-50 Olympics on gender equity. So how's the gender split with regards to esports from a player's perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's if you look at the global gaming population overall, it's about 46% female. Global gaming. Esports, I think, has some way to go to catch itself up to that global gaming number. I think the female population is probably doing a lot more casual gaming than esports, as from what we can see from our statistics. However, those numbers are increasing quite considerably. And so it has a female representation that is skewed to certain games. Most of these esports now have female ecosystems where there are clubs that are female only that are playing again in leagues, etc. And I'd love to see that evolve over time, so that there's nothing to say that men and women couldn't compete at the same level within esports. Absolutely nothing scientifically proven to say that either. In fact, it should not be any different, right? So I think it's just a question of uptake. What we have seen is there is a strong cohort of females coming through from the sort of talent space. So the talent that surround themselves with the games, who are the presenters, the casters, the hosts. There's a good group of female leaders evolving within that space. And I'd say, in a way, that's actually faster than what you've seen in traditional sports. Traditional sports has now evolved where you've got female casters, analysts, etc. on the desk, but it's kind of only really come about in the past couple of years. In the esports space, it's been there really from day one.
That's interesting because, as you said, most traditional sports, it's that's very recent that's been on the analyst side.
Yeah, and I'm not sure how that's manifested itself per se, but I think in the esports space, there's now a good, strong cohort. Take League of Legends. There are a couple of individuals that have really been part of League of Legends since I've been working in the space for at least 6 or 7 years, and they are, really household names within League. And are part and parcel of the delivery of the output on the server. We have a couple within CSGO as well that are very prominent, and actually more and more are coming through. So I think it's an interesting evolution, and I think we'll see that the female-male balance really does even out, even from a size of population. Even within my own company, our own company, we're seeing that the percentage of females is increasing as we grow larger, right? And I think that will be, as esports becomes a bit more mainstream, I think the talent and the people that work within it will also become more mainstream, and therefore attract different profiles of individuals from within it.
Mm. You tweeted a while back that 2024 is shaping out to be a game-changing year for UK esports. So now when we have passed the half year mark here, how do you see the development? How has it been in the UK this year?
Yeah, look, I think that this has probably been the biggest year for UK esports on record. I think, not just the work that we've done around the events that we've hosted within the UK, but the wider ecosystem is now in a very strong position. And you've got some great clubs, great output coming from there. I think also, one of the things that really was very compelling for us was the work that Live Nation has done with us, UK-based business, London and partners on hosting us there. I mentioned the British Esports Association, the UK government, various others. I do think that is playing a major part in making the UK esports hub for the wider world. And I hope to see more towards the second half of the year as well.
Me too. So if we jump into your background a little bit, you studied French and politics, and then worked for Google and Disney, and now at Blast. So how has your career journey been like up until this point?
God, I've never had anyone quote my French and politics degree. I did study French and politics. I did speak French quite well when I was younger. Born to a French speaking father, and so that was quite helpful. But obviously fascinated by politics. I'm fortunate to have had a varied career where I've done stuff where I believe I'm at like the bleeding heart of where things are happening. So I worked for a mobile business that was bought by Google when mobile was just coming into its own. And we were bought by Google. And then I worked in the influencer space when influencers started becoming something of importance back in sort of 2014, etc. We were bought by Disney. I spent some time at Disney as well, and then really kind of honed in on this world of esports as being something that I think that my experiences could lend quite a positive hand to, and started working within esports in 2018. And we've grown this business phenomenally well over the period. And so I think the combination of understanding product from Google, sales acumen as well has been important, commercial models within, IP and stuff like that within Disney as well has really lent itself to esports. And so, yeah, excited for that.
I'm sure. So you said that you like to work in like where it's hot and whatever it's interesting at the moment, so to speak. So is this that what attracts you to these different jobs that you have had, that you feel like this is something that is like up and coming and a trend?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think when I went into mobile, I think that had already developed somewhat, and ultimately reaped the benefits from that, and then was able to push on at Google. And I think influencer marketing was the same. I think when I came into esports, it was probably slightly more nascent than I realized, at least on the monetization side. But I do feel like I like to be within sectors where I can make a difference. And I feel like, I consider myself sort of a growth CEO, someone that is able to grow businesses, grow and expand teams geographically, businesses geographically, probably more than a FTSE 500 CEO, for example. This is a different type of genre of individual, and so I think that's really where my experiences lay and where I'm excited. And the great thing in this ecosystem and this sector is that no one day is the same. I mean, honestly, you wake up in the morning, you have a plan and you have a structured day, and then you don't know what you're going to get, right? Stuff hits you, and and it evolves incredibly quickly. So part of the challenge of that is just being able to remain level-headed, focused and structured, and not let yourself get moved in the wrong direction by certain things.
That's really interesting. I spoke to Phil Andrews recently on the podcast. He worked for USA weightlifting and now USA fencing. And he said similar things, that he's like a growth CEO. He likes to come in when maybe they have had some issues, and to, come out of that and maximize that one. So what do you think it is in your leadership and in your personality that has this ability to grow a company?
Yeah, look, I think that I'm a very driven individual. I'm also like an eternal optimist as well. So I just believe anything is possible. And I think that manifests itself across the organization. So people actually have a sense that, if we're on this journey and we feel positive from a management level around, I think that has a positive impact on the rest of the organization. I also feel like when you're working with a group of people like we're working with, the average age of the individuals within our company is very young. It's about 29, right? And therefore, they are incredibly passionate about what they do. They love what they do. And so when you add passion, organization, and drive together, you tend to get some really good results. And so ideally, I'm always striving to try and bring all those 3 points together in my leadership style. And that ends up having, hopefully, a positive impact on the results of the business.
So how would you say is your leadership style as a CEO managing the business?
Very open, approachable, generally a lead from the front through sort of charisma and drive is typically my style. I like to do a lot of work around empowerment. So giving people the reins to be able to operate within. Spent a lot of time in the past couple of years focusing on how to get out of the weeds and into the bigger ticket pieces, allowing teams within the organization to really excel at what they do and provide them with the autonomy to do that. So I think generally those are the things that I kind of thrive on, and being within the conversation when it can have a strategic impact on the business. So trying to set sort of strategic direction of, right, I think there's an opportunity in this place. We're going to go there. Now let's take care of it. That's very much how my style works.
I like that. Not to micromanage, but to set the overall strategy and then trust in the team that they get it done.
Yeah, I mean, look, set the strategy up, and you're only as good as the people around you, right? So make sure you've got a great leadership team with you, wider organization, and then get out the way, right? Like, because quite often you're not the right person to be able to carry a project through from A to Z. Set the top line goals, discuss those top line goals, and then let the rest of the team carry it out. Check back in, right? People don't like it when you leave them with a task that then is not checked back in afterwards. So constantly check up and say, where are we at with this particular initiative in the next 3 months?
So, with your experience, what is some advice you have for young people in the industry that they maybe just started or they want to get into the industry?
Yeah, look, I think this is as we've said, I think it's a growing industry. I think it's not been without its bumps over the period of the last 10 years or so. I think that the best thing they can possibly do when they come into this industry is apply the science and understanding they've had from their previous experience and bring it into this industry, i.e., let's not keep writing the script in the same way it's been written for the last 10 years. So many industries just keep doing the same thing over and over again. Let's rewrite that. Let's learn from where the best things are happening. And then let's not be afraid to try stuff. And this is an important point for me, is that I feel that somewhere along the line, and this may be something out of the pandemic, but some of the newer generations coming into this workplace, and it is kind of a little bit counterintuitive, are a little risk adverse. And I really want individuals to be able to have the empowerment to take risks, to try things, and to be able to offer solutions. And I think for whatever reason, we don't see all of that all the time. And I'm not sure quite why that's manifested, but I'd like to see more of that.
I think that comes also maybe if you're not so risk averse, maybe it has to do that you're afraid of the consequences. So, building that type of culture in the company that it's okay to fail as long as you learn from your mistakes and you move on from them and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that this is why I think it's so sort of counterintuitive. I don't think this generation is actually afraid to fail. I I think that it's just a fundamental difference in output. Whereas I think that they are looking for guide rails and guardrails around them, but then they don't want them either. So it's a very interesting state of play. And I think it will evolve. And I think this new generation coming through will be very optimistic about the future. And if they're given the empowerment, they're given the space to work within, I think they can be incredible assets to the business overall. As I said, we skew really young, right? I'm like one of the oldest in the business, and I'm young, but we skew young, and I think that's okay, right? And I think we should just keep continually enhancing that.
I agree. So you mentioned that the industry have had some bumps, but has there been any bumps in your career? And if so, how did you overcome them?
Yeah, look, I think that you learn from your experiences, right? I had some big bumps in my career very early on, very young. I lost my father very young and then went into his business. And I wasn't successful at the start. This is my sort of early 20s or, late teens, early 20s, and then went off to university. But I learned a lot from failure. And I think that some of the best, the most successful people within the industry are people who have had some failures in their life. On top of that, I think that when, during certain points of this last period, it's been tough, right? Monetization was really hard. Valuations were, very high, but then the monetization was quite low. And so that was tough for us as a business. I think also learning as an individual how to take feedback is hugely important, right? Because I think that if you can take feedback from your closest, but also the wider organization, I think you learn as a human. And I think that a few times in my career, have learned that hard way, and I've now got a lot better at it. And I think that makes a big difference to growing a business going forwards.
Mm. So now when you're the CEO and giving feedback and giving advice, is that something you have with you from your experience of saying that you could have been better to taking advice and feedback?
Yeah, but I mean, also, I really believe that you should be, even if you're the CEO, you want upwards feedback, right? You want feedback from your direct cohorts of where you're not succeeding. And the good thing is, again, about this younger generation is they're really open to doing that, right? As long as you provide them with the boundaries where they feel protected to give it to you. And I think that is something that I try and strive for, which is sort of being approachable. So therefore, I think they're prepared to do it. But I do believe that feedback is very critical, and fundamentally, you can have a growth conversation or a performance review with one of your employees, and then give feedback, and you can see when people take it constructively, and you can see when people are not capable of receiving that information. And so it's quite hard, but you'll know who the people are that are going to grow.
Definitely. I think that ties also in a little bit into the culture that I mentioned before in the company, to have that, to create that culture, as you say, to be approachable and that they dare to give some feedback to you.
100%. I mean, I love it when people grab me in the common areas of our workplace and in the kitchen or whatever, and say, "Hey, about that thing," and blah blah blah. And I try, and if I can't speak to them at that moment in time, I'll try and find time to have that conversation. Because here's the thing, you never know what you're going to learn, right, from individuals. And if you keep yourself in a closed environment, the information that your brain, which by the way, we only use like 7% of it, is using, you are never going to be able to succeed going forward. And you need to be able to open that up.
Yeah. So talking about your background, what is your sporting background? Have you been playing esports? Have you been doing traditional sports, or what is your sport background?
Yeah, so I am not a traditional player of esports, but I do like watching it. I watch a lot of Counter-Strike. Interestingly, I also watch some of the other games that we're in, and I've spent quite a lot of time trying to get my head around Fortnite, so that my 11-year-old is at peace with that. He plays a lot of that. Traditional sports, I'm a pretty massive fan of the football space. I love watching football, live tennis. I've watched a bunch of cricket over my time, rugby, but generally more traditional sport. In fact, any sport, I'll probably digest it. So I'm a big fan of sort of live competitive gaming. But I mean, I'm actually a big fan of like live events overall, which is why this company is quite a good fit. I love the whole experience of that, of being in a venue with 10,000 people going wild. So that can be from a concert to a football match, right? Played a lot of squash over my time, badly. I used to be quite decent at badminton, but I'm talking about when I was a teenager. And now I think the best I do is going on the running machine, when I can. So that's about all I can do.
I see. So you've done a little bit of everything, it sounds like.
I mean, even when I was a kid, I used to watch a bunch of snooker, but I don't know how well that resonates with the consumers that are listening to your podcast.
No, I'm trying to get as many sports as possible to cover a wide range. And I haven't had, pool or snooker on. So I hope to make that happen, because I'm curious to learn more about that as well.
I mean, I think it's interesting, some of these sports who have been around for a long time, who have had an evolution of change. We should try and see if we can get you fixed up with someone within that space, and to try and get some of the snooker players on. I mean, lots of these sports have taken an evolution in the future. And, by the way, like if you look at the global mix of sport, right, it's very interesting when you see in certain territories around the world what they're actually doing. Number one sport in India, as an example, is cricket, right? That does not come as a surprise. But very few people are going to be able to tell you, who are not from the region, what the number two sport is, for example. And it's kabaddi, right? Which has got 400 million, viewers on it. So I'm just fascinated by how, global sport has a place in everyone's house.
Definitely. So I usually end with the networking question, but since we went into that already with the snooker a little bit, is there someone from your network that you think would be a good guest for this podcast?
Oh, well, I mean, look, I think in the global sports space, there are a multitude of different people that I'm connected with. So either in the football space, a lot of connected tissue there. I'm happy to work with you on that. Within the racing space as well. So we could probably suggest a few ideas of people that might want to come onto the podcast and give you an angle.
Sounds good. Is there something I haven't asked you yet that you feel is important to mention?
No, I think, look, I've enjoyed the podcast a lot. I think what's interesting about the way that you tackle some of the questions, which is very different to others, is I've never spent so much time talking about my personal career trajectory as today, other than when being in an interview, perhaps. But I think that's interesting to give context around why the individual within this particular sector is succeeding. And I think that's a nice combo. And so I just wanted to give some feedback and say, like, I think that's a really nice angle to a podcast.
I appreciate that. And great to get some feedback, as we talked about before, also giving and receiving feedback.
Absolutely.
And I think it's interesting. Why I have done it like this is because I think that many people think that they have to study sports management, do an internship in sports in order to work within the sports sector. And I want to shine a light on the fact that you can come from different industries, different backgrounds, and other places, not the only traditional path, and still be able to work in the sports industry.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And I think as a consequence of that, you will attract different talent to your podcast that you might not normally get. And I think that is, by the way, I think that's hugely exciting when sports and culture and gaming all come together as one, which is kind of what we're seeing happen in the ecosystem. But delving into the personalities and what drives them, I think that's a really interesting play, because otherwise you miss out on the sort of history of why they're doing the job they're doing. And we never hear that on a podcast. And I think you delve into that really well.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Thank you for your time.
Robbie, it's been a pleasure to speak with you today. Thank you so much for taking the time to be on Sports Management Podcast.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure being on Sports Management Podcast. Have a great day.
Thank you for listening to the Sports Management Podcast. Please hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on any upcoming episodes. Also, feel free to leave a comment about what you thought about this episode. If you want to get in contact with me, send an email to sportsmpodcast@gmail.com or hit me up on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram @sportsmpodcast.